Welcome to Bad Takes. I'm Laura McGann, the executive editor of Grid. I am here with Matt Yglesias, who is also a contributor to Grid. Hey, Matt.
I am. Hey, what's going on?
I was thinking today, like we do every week.
We talk about a bad take.
Yep. That's
but
what we're going to do.
This is an IRL bad take instead of a Twitter bad take.
Okay, yeah. Most of the last decade, Matt and I have been talking about Twitter bad takes. But this one is special. So, all right, I'm going to set the scene.
Okay.
And we'll get going onto this bad take that happened to me in my life. So, I just had a birthday recently, a sort of milestone birthday. So, some of my good friends and I got together and we went on a little trip. And two of my best friends and I are on a remote island called Monhegan Island. And this is important. You look like I'm losing you, but we're on
Monhegan Island.
Yes.
This is a famous remote island.
It's a famous island. It's off the coast of Maine. It, in the summer, becomes a haven for artists, and it's also beautiful, and you can go for hikes. And I would say hike that's a generous term. It's really more of a beautiful walk. But anyway, so there we are. The three of us, and we are enjoying
the East Coast. Our hiking doesn't get that
flat.
serious.
It's not that, it doesn't go that high uphill. So anyway, so the three of us are enjoying the day, and the topic of our terrible doctors comes up, and this segues into a conversation that blows my mind. So my two best friends, one of them, she is a very fancy lawyer. The other one, she is an academic. She is a physicist. And she says during the course of this conversation that the war on obesity is way overblown and that, in fact, you could be healthy and obese. And I'm sort of standing there like, maybe I should just not say anything because, why stir the pot here? But I can't not do that, because of who I am.
Sure.
And so I sort of push back on this idea.
Yeah, so you're a jerk.
I'm a jerk.
People
and I'm
are just
saying,
trying to have a nice hike.
Everybody's just having a nice time, and we're trying to accept people's bodies and accept them for who they are. And I am saying, no, being obese actually has real health consequences. And I start rattling off facts about COVID and all these things. And my two friends, they are staunchly opposed to what I'm saying. And their argument, and specifically my physicist friend, she was the one who really leaned into this idea that the stigma of obesity and the way that people who have obesity are treated, that is the issue, and that those factors actually outweigh any factor connected to obesity. And so then I said, well, so why do you think this? And she says studies. And I said, well, I have studies. And we're on Monhegan Island, right? So our phones don't work. So we can't just Google this and start showing each other studies on our phones, which in hindsight was probably good because we just stood there. And it was very like 1990 because we just stood there staring at each other like, who is right? Yeah. And we can't turn to the internet.
I've actually found that Googling studies doesn't always resolve these arguments, but well, it's even worse on Monhegan Island.
Yeah, because you can't. And so I was then asking her about this because I just didn't. I am aware of the
mainstream
body positivity movement and accepting people who have obesity because, look, the reality is there's discrimination against people who are overweight or obese in the United States, and it is terrible. And we need to address that. But where I disagreed with my friend was around the issue of whether or not you can be obese and healthy. So that's where the stalemate ends.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna tell some anecdotes of my own. I got one I'm saving. Okay. I'm gonna go off script. So I was in Maine in the summer of 2020 on a coastal island, and I was hiking with my 5-year-old.
Okay.
And it's not the most difficult hike in the world, but it's uphill and stuff like that. And we get to a point where I am huffing and puffing, and I need to tell my 5-year-old son that, we need to take a break.
Oof.
Right? And, it's, really embarrassing. to be in a situation where a little kid is like able to outpace you at like a moderate kind of physical activity. And then later that year, I went down to Austin, Texas, and I appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience. And it was like November, December, something like that. It was in the period when COVID-19 vaccines had been approved, or like approval was like right around the corner. But they were not yet like available.
This was deep COVID. This was like danger COVID.
But it was specifically like the vaccine light at the end of the tunnel was very clearly visible.
Yes,
I just didn't have it.
No, but you could still But the key factor there was it was dangerous because COVID was still around and people were not vaccinated yet.
Right. But so Rogan's asking me about vaccines.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, yeah, vaccines are going to be great. I'm going to take them. And he's like, I heard there's some like pretty bad side effects. And I was like, I don't know if that's true. It turns out he was right and I was wrong, actually. And like the vaccine side effects did actually make me feel like pretty shitty for a couple days. But
I think we're off track.
Still,
no.
This is 100% relevant.
Okay,
I promise you.
I'm sorry.
Because he was trapping me because he's a good podcast host, right?
See, look, you're trapping me now. Go on.
So he was getting me to say, like, it might be true that the vaccines, will like give you a headache or make you tired for a couple days or have these other downsides.
Right.
But it's really good and important because it significantly lowers your risk of serious, needing to be hospitalized or dying, all this normal like pro-vax stuff. And then he turns to me with the hammer blow and he's like, I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, so why don't you lose some fucking weight, man, if like you want to reduce your risk of COVID? Because I was quite hefty at the time, and I'm like, like stuttering because that's not, I think like considered a socially appropriate way to engage with other people.
You were a guest, by the way, on the show.
Yes,
too. Like, he had you on the show, and
we're not like buddies.
No, but
so. I think our ensuing dialogue about this was, I think, reflective of where your friend is coming from, which is that, like Rogan's like a guy who's in good shape and more power to him. He was not the first person in history to have pointed out to me that like it would be better to be like stronger and thinner, or to suggest that if I ate different food and exercised more, I could achieve that. And the problem, as I think people know, is that while there are all these studies showing the kind of health costs of obesity, there's also a bajillion studies about how like telling people like, yo, just eat less food tomorrow and also every day forever, like that doesn't work. Right. That like nobody, and again, to be clear, it's not like it's false that if you eat dramatically less food and then sustain that habit indefinitely, your weight will go down. It's that approximately nobody sustainably loses weight through that method, right? That the human body is designed to live through periods in which there is not enough food. Right? That's the vast majority of human history is sometimes you go out hunting and like you don't bring the animal down, right? And you can't eat. Sometimes it's a bad harvest and people have to sort of go without for months at a time. And so people tend to overindulge when food is around, and then they're ready for these kind of lean seasons. But in the modern world, we don't have those lean seasons, right? And so if you find yourself, eating less than you need to maintain your current weight, your whole hormonal system goes into like starvation mode, right? Where like you gotta find food and you feel hungry, you start getting weird cravings, because it's like if you think about not our current life, but like the whole context of human existence, it's like you got to be highly motivated to go find food if you're losing weight. And it just like it doesn't work.
Right.
And then there is discrimination.
Well, I just want to pause on that because I think that this is key when we're talking about obesity, that it is a complex disease with multiple factors that factor into how people, become obese. And it is a progressive disease. Mm-hmm. So this is the problem with it, is that once you have obesity, it's very difficult to reverse it because dieting puts you into starvation mode and then you gain more weight. If you attempt to exercise more, you're not in the same caloric place as other people, that the body is fighting to maintain that weight. And also you need fewer calories actually than other people. It's this progressive problem. And you started to talk about the sort of social effects and mental health effects that, one, just being treated badly in life does lead to anxiety, depression, and all of these things cause literal hormonal changes in your body that make it harder to lose weight. So you've got this self-fulfilling sort of cyclical nature of this disease where it's not only difficult to lose weight, it's also just difficult to pause, that it's going to progressively get worse once you get there, which is what's, particularly terrible about it.
Right. Well, so I'm on the show, and this is why, like, I see where your friend is coming from, right? Which is like, why is Rogan giving me a hard time? But fortunately for him, so that he winds up being like a good person in this anecdote, he didn't know this, and I didn't say it on the air, but I had been at that time turning over and over in my mind the idea of going to get bariatric surgery, in which, a doctor sort of cuts an incision into your abdomen and like sews your stomach to become like a smaller organ. And there's very strong, research base for this, that unlike telling people, diet and exercise, it actually does work. But I had been kind of, I don't know. It's like surgery. It doesn't sound great, and
right.
I
and
wasn't.
You just said you have a 5-year-old,
right? And I wasn't super into it, but I went to like reconsider it more seriously, because I thought about what Rogan was saying, and how much COVID sort of drove home that like this is a real issue. And so I found out that there had been sort of new progressions in surgical techniques, and that there are now some offices where they do what's called an endoscopic gastroplasty, in which instead of cutting into your abdomen, they kind of put little instruments, camera, down your throat and sort of sew your stomach from the inside.
Can I ask a question about this?
Yeah.
So you had said the abdomen surgery involves sewing the stomach. The sleeve, I believe, they actually remove part of the stomach and then sew it up.
Yes.
For this procedure, is that the same? Are they removing part of the stomach, or are they sort of sewing it to make it smaller?
Yeah, in the gastroplasty, because you can't like remove tissue that way.
Right.
It's like just a stitching.
Got it. Okay.
Kind of thing,
okay.
And it's so part of the invention of the technique was like just like devising exactly where to do the stitches to create the good shape. At any rate, this, you need a general anesthetic for it, so it is not zero risk. And of course, like the doctor could like mess it up.
Sure.
But when done correctly, it has, much faster sort of recovery time, because nobody has like cut you open, right?
Got it.
You can't eat solid food for a couple days. So eventually, I decided to go forward with it and do it, and it took several months to get it scheduled, et cetera, et cetera. And so
and you did the second one. Sorry,
I did the endoscopic, and I've lost 50 to 60 pounds since I did that last fall, and my knee doesn't hurt anymore. I can go
literally,
on.
There was a point in time where you were limping, and I heard a lot about the knee.
Yes.
in our conversations. And now, you were headed, Dr. McGann here, you were definitely headed on the trajectory of needing to have your knee replaced.
Well,
you were on the trajectory, and now you're not. That's great.
Maybe.
It's great.
At a minimum, I can absolutely do a moderate hike.
Sure.
With more vigor than a 5-year-old.
Woohoo!
Which was not, always the case.
I know we're joking here, but I don't know. I want the people at home to know. Like I don't know.
Right.
You definitely both, yes, you have visibly lost weight, but, you shouldn't downplay that. Like a major surgery to your knee is a big deal.
Well, and just in general, it's just clear that, you have sort of better physical functioning at a lower weight. And also, I think people who look at it will tell you that exercise is a really terrible way to lose weight for various calorie balance reasons. But exercise is also a healthy thing to do.
It's a good thing to do, yes.
And it is easier to exercise when you're not super fat.
Sure.
Right? So
yeah.
the summer in DC is disgusting, but when
Right.
the weather is good, I will run 2 or 3 miles in the morning because I can do that. And I'm not a really fast runner.
Sure.
But I can
That's
do
good for your
I can do a
heart.
run at an okay pace.
Yeah.
And that itself is good for you. And these are the kinds of, small scale, obvious, but important benefits. And the whole upshot of all of this is that I think we need to get out of this kind of binary paradigm of diet and exercise, which doesn't work.
Right.
Versus there's a phenomenon called solution aversion, right? Where if the solution to climate change is you can't drive your favorite SUV, but you really want to keep driving your favorite SUV, then you decide that climate change is fake. Right.
Okay.
So if people get in their heads that the only possible solution to obesity is giving people a hard time about diet and exercise that doesn't work.
Right.
It incentivizes them to say, well, maybe it's actually not a problem at all. Right.
Right.
But when you realize that there are solutions, I mean, surgeries are fairly drastic, but there have been these sort of breakthroughs recently. Last year, Novo Nordisk got FDA approval for something that they've branded as Wegovy, which is a once-a-week injection. And this is a medication that they originally developed as a diabetes treatment. They came up with this slightly different formulation as just a kind of a weight loss drug for pre-diabetics. And people lose 15% of body weight based on these injections. And the compound is called semaglutide. I have no idea how to pronounce these kind of chemistry names. But semaglutide is one of a class of what's called, I think, GPT-1 antagonists.
So what do they do?
Well, this is a whole class of diabetes drugs.
Okay.
So now that they sort of had the success with Wegovy, every company that has a GPT-1 antagonist is testing it for weight loss. So what these do is they influence your hormones. And this comes out of research actually on the gastric surgeries, that when people first came up with gastric sleeve, I think their idea in their head was, well, if your stomach's smaller, you just won't eat as much food. And it'll be fine. Follow-on research showed, though, that it actually really altered the sort of gut hormones that your stomach produces. There's just certain kind of hormones that signal to your body you should try to eat more food. And when you make the stomach smaller, it produces less of them. Right.
Right. I mean, and this is huge because if you, like we've said, if you go on an extreme diet to try to lose some weight, fight off obesity, you're going to feel hungry all the time.
Right.
And that's why people aren't successful. You can't just walk around hungry, hangry all the time. It's not going to work. So this was interesting because I don't know that people maybe know that generally, that it's not just making the organ smaller, but actually resetting your metabolic kind of balance where your hormones are different.
And that's how they came around to the injections, right? Because if it turns out that one of the main causes of action of the surgery is through the hormonal balance.
Right. Could you just target that instead of having people go through surgery?
Right. And that's what they've been developing. And, Wegovy's results are not as strong as the results of a surgery. You're looking at 15% rather than 20 or 25% loss of body weight. On the other hand, it's way easier to take an injection.
Than to do a surgery.
And just, what that suggests is that you could have a world in which there's a range of treatments, some of which have more potency but higher risks, and some of which have less potency but, are just much easier.
Well, and it depends on the person, right? Some people, there's different levels. This is also somewhat controversial, the sort of levels of healthy weight to severe obesity. And, if somebody, when you're thinking about this being a progressive disease, somebody on the lower end of obesity taking one of these medications, getting back to a healthy weight, that's great.
Right. Well, and it's also just it's a potentially a larger research program, once you sort of start to see things that way. What's interesting to me is that we don't see, back to Rogan and the vaccines, right? COVID vaccines were a really big deal. Right? The government poured a lot of money into creating them. When they came out, there were big public awareness campaigns. It was just like a huge deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal. Yeah.
And, to the extent of like they were made mandatory in some circumstances, but like it was like, this is really good. We've got a really good breakthrough. And I think that like if Novo Nordisk is like, oh, we have a shot and it'll like cure leukemia or something, like that would be a really big deal.
Yes. This
has been a surprisingly like not big deal. Almost as if obesity is like a really obscure niche problem.
Right. When
that isn't, like it was a breakthrough in like some blood disorder that only 0.5% of people have. When it's like a super duper mainstream health issue in the United States, it just struck me as like incredibly underhyped. Like while prepping for this episode, I was like, okay, I should see how, every major media outlet covered this story. And like, I don't even know how they all covered. Like, I'm not sure that they all did. And certainly the ones who did cover it, it was mostly covered as a business news story.
Yeah.
As kind of like good news for Novo Nordisk.
Yes. So there were two types. So I did the same thing. And I don't want to pull back the curtain here and ruin the magic of this show, but we kind of know sometimes what the take is going to be before we get here. But there was a coverage in the New York Times, but it was just sort of it was a straight write-up, and it gave me the information, but it wasn't, from what I could tell, and obviously I'm looking back online at it, like it didn't have a headline of sort of that said to me, major breakthrough in disease ravaging America.
And there wasn't like an op-ed from a former director of the CDC explaining, here's how we should think about deploying this new technology, right?
Yes. Or advocacy groups going, we need to get this into the hands of people who need it most, and we need to look at...
Right. There's the seventh paragraph that's like, oh, but it's expensive. There's no policy debate.
I think that what we're saying is that it was not the dominant, it wasn't even the dominant news story of the day at the time. And you could imagine if there was a similar breakthrough in, any kind of cancer.
But also just like realistically.
Way less progress gets more attention.
Well, and also just like dumb stuff.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Like if we found out.
Well, we can't compare anything to dumb stuff. That does well. There's dumb stuff always does well. But
okay, that's fair enough. But yeah, again, I think that the COVID comp, I do think is relevant because it's like COVID is like even today in its somewhat fallow period continues to be like a big news story.
Well, yeah.
That like gets on the front page sometimes when things happen, and this was not treated that way, and it hasn't influenced like subsequent coverage of related topics,
Correct. And one of the things that also is interesting, I was just looking at the CDC's website this morning just to take a look at it, and their recommendation, because I was looking up on the CDC's website, they have some information about obesity and COVID and the risk factors that you're much higher risk of severe illness, of hospitalization, and death from COVID if you have obesity. And at the very bottom, they kind of lay out all the information and the research, et cetera. And then at the end, it says they have this section of, well, what to do about it. And they literally have this paragraph about eating healthy and exercising.
Right.
And I thought, but we know that doesn't work. And not only that, we know what the best, we have these great tools. So we're back in this place of, it's not just the media, but literally the CDC is saying what isn't.
But that's like, I guess like that's part of what I mean about the media though, right? That like with COVID, there's like incredible amounts of discussion about what is the CDC doing, right? And like there's no choice that the CDC can make that won't get somebody being like they made the wrong choice here, right?
Sure.
Whereas like nobody said, as we had these results for Wegovy come in, as we had bariatric surgery evidence come in, as we had gastroplasty developed, there's no like high profile commentary on like, should we be changing the guidance? Should Medicaid pay for people to get bariatric surgery? And under what circumstances should they do that? There's other stuff kind of in the pipeline. There's a drug called Mounjaro from Eli Lilly, which this is a diabetes medication. It's FDA authorized for type 2 diabetes. But in their kind of early experimentation with it as a weight loss drug, it looks like it might be even more potent than Wegovy. But there's no learned that because our producer was helping us do research for this episode.
I just acted like I knew that, but actually I read it because the producer told us about it.
So thank you, Olivia.
Thank you.
But also, like, if somebody found out that some flu shot was, like, possibly actually more effective at preventing COVID, we would, like, talk about that. We'd be like, should we be funding more research into this? Should it be authorized? Should doctors prescribe it off-label? But it's like I never heard about the idea that an existing
and actually
diabetes...
So also, like, if you do the counterfactual, can you picture Joe Biden out there being like, we need an obesity moonshot. We need everybody, like, start ill. We need to get people these pills. We need to inject people. People need to start getting these obesity surgeries. It's so important. And, like, you're even laughing, you know, like, we're chuckling of, like, no way. I was laughing
at we need to inject people.
Oh.
That sounds a little menacing.
It is, yeah. I mean, also operating on people. I mean, I'm just saying that.
Right, there's no publicity push.
We understand there's almost an absurdity to it of just this. I can't even imagine it getting this huge public push. And yet, this is such a huge public health problem. I think we might need to pause. Maybe we should take a break for a minute. And we'll come back because I think there are the roots. I think we need to talk about the roots of why we ended up in this media place.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we were, like, getting into a fascinating discussion, but I do think, in fairness to your friend whose take we called bad, we ought to step back and say, like, what is the evidence? Like, if we are now believe that there are tools that we could use to reduce obesity that are efficacious, what is the evidence that, like, this is important and that your pal is wrong?
Okay, so I would put this into two baskets of problems. Problem number one, which is actually even in the kind of body positivity movement, is acknowledged that there are many studies that show increased risk factor. If you have obesity, you're at increased risk for cardiovascular disease, for stroke, for heart attack, for all of these outcomes that are severe and can lead to early death. And it is accepted at a sort of larger level. But their argument is that if you maintain other markers of health besides weight, you can be healthy.
Sure.
And so if you look at that statement, I would say that is not quite accurate. And so you have basket number two, which is just by being overweight or as soon as you become overweight and then as you progress into obesity, severe obesity, your body itself has problems. You end up with heightened inflammation. Your hormonal balances change. Your sleep patterns are affected. Your ability, your sort of lung capacity and ability to fight off lung infections like COVID are diminished. And that is even if you have healthy range blood pressure and cholesterol, there are these other things going on in your body that are inherently unhealthy. And I would also say, going back to basket one, that even if you take into account other markers of health, like namely, I think blood pressure and cholesterol come up a lot. I have normal blood pressure, I have healthy cholesterol range, I'm obese, but it's fine because these other markers are okay. Your risk for these other problems like stroke, heart attack, are only slightly lower than these other markers, and you are still way, way, way higher risk than people who are in a healthy weight range. So that, to me, is where I think I disagree. It's like the fundamental disagreement, right? Is that I think that these baskets of studies that are saying if you are obese, you are at high risk for these deadly diseases, and studies that show fundamentally your body's hormones and inflammation and other processes are affected. Your brain, your heart, your muscles, your bones are inherently changing because of having obesity. That I just think that that's really important to understand.
Well, and I also just think as a logical matter, as a scientific matter, there's a question of like how do we talk about statistical risks, right? Like I know people who have been heavy smokers for most of their lives who have lived to a quite old age.
Right.
Most people know people like that.
Sure.
That is a thing that happens.
Sure.
There are people who live long, healthy lives while smoking heavily.
Right.
And then there's my mother who died in her mid-50s.
Right.
And those are both extreme scenarios, right? On average, we know that people who smoke a lot live meaningfully less than people who don't. Right? Like that's the statistics.
And that's what's happening here as well. And maybe we can kind of transition into talking about the social piece of this, which is that when you talk about top line numbers, a person who's living the life of an obese person and feeling that discrimination and feeling the frustration of going to a doctor's office where they hear you need to lose weight because numerically, et cetera, it's sort of this dehumanizing experience, both in life, in the doctor's office, that you yourself are being reduced to your fat. And therefore, you are part of the statistic. You are not an individual, and a sense of, what happened to the individual, that there's different people have different reasons for being obese, whether it's genetic reasons, environmental reasons, there's all these different factors. And that I understand the kind of pro-fat movement, that you don't want to be dehumanized, you don't want to be discriminated against. And that's sort of the roots of this sort of backlash against, I don't know if backlash is quite the right word, but there's just documented unfair treatment of people who are above a healthy weight.
But so, what I think is like a tougher kind of conversation to have. One, like, I think that these treatments should be more publicized. They should be more emphasized.
Well, so that's the issue,
there should be
right?
more. There should be more emphasis on accessibility. But the other thing is that with smoking, right? Smoking rates have gone down a tremendous amount since I was in college.
Yes.
And some of that has been sort of pharmacological breakthroughs, right?
Sure.
We discovered that you can take Wellbutrin and that reduces compulsive behaviors, including, addiction-type behaviors. We've created nicotine patches and nicotine gums that people can use as sort of harm reduction sustenance. We have vape pens that people can smoke,
we have tools
but that
help
are less damaging.
Yes.
But the other thing that we did during that time is we first made it so that you can't smoke in offices. Yeah. Then we made it so you can't smoke in restaurants. Then we made it so you can't smoke in bars and coffee shops. We raised the price of a pack of cigarettes. The FDA raised the minimum age to buy cigarettes. We just like the FCC got Hollywood to make it be the case that like sympathetic characters wouldn't smoke in television shows, right? To the point that now we're coming out on the other side of that, and Kim on Better Call Saul can just like a character attribute of hers is that she smokes sometimes, but there was like a big period of emphasis to make it like don't have the cool guy be a smoker, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's the pettiest one compared to the sort of structural things, which as somebody who used to smoke and who quit, and who failed to quit several times before successfully doing it, something that made it a lot easier is that smoking stopped being normalized. And it is so much easier to like maintain the willpower to not smoke a cigarette when you're never sitting at a table with someone who
who's
lights one up,
smoking. Yeah.
Right? You don't like find yourself in that situation. Instead, the smokers have to like
Social
slink
exclusion,
off
right?
outside like weirdos.
This was a big piece of the, you have to smoke further and further away from public buildings, which was, social exclusion, right? And then you feel like a pariah because you're over there smoking your cigarette in the snow or whatever by yourself. And
so I don't think we should like make people eat Fritos in the snow or something. But what I do wonder is like, because again, as somebody who I think I've lost a good amount of weight, but I have regained some of it, and I'm concerned about that trajectory. It would be easier if we could do something, I think, to like cut back on the availability of like gross snacks all over the place. We used to work in an office.
Oh God.
That had these like
the M&Ms,
these like vats of M&Ms,
peanut M&Ms. Do you know I haven't eaten a peanut M&M since the office closed.
Exactly.
March 2020. I haven't been in the office.
Because
I don't think I'm not going to go.
Even 275-pound Matt would find it preposterous to stand up from his desk, walk to the elevator, go down to the lobby, walk 2 blocks, pick up a pack of peanut M&Ms, hand over cash money for them, walk back to the office, and sit at my desk eating. Because I'm not a sociopath, right? But you just put them there.
And it's not even just putting them there. It was the jangle as they came out of the machine and hit that plastic cup. And it was like a Pavlovian response where I would just stand up and wander over like, oh, the sweet sound of the peanut M&Ms hitting the plastic cup. And the cup was probably the size of like a measuring cup, like 1 cup, which is a serving to me, which we would have. I would eat. I mean, it was just, it just became normal. Like, oh, yeah, peanut M&Ms are an everyday food. Why don't my pants fit? And so, it's definitely that. I mean, look, so there are 2 things. If there is the question of, I think the big question right now around why don't we equip doctors to tell patients that there actually are things that you can do to lose weight that will work.
Yeah.
And then 2, there's what you're describing of how do we put ourselves on a different trajectory to turn the tide on obesity itself, which is a different, to me, set of issues. I mean, they're interrelated, obviously. I want to read this. This is something that struck me. So I went back and, I was kind of looking into the anti-fat movement. And there was this piece that Michael Hobbs, who...
So this is like the anti-fat movement.
Right. Oh, excuse me. Yes. I don't know if pro-fat is the right term, but it's the anti-fat movement.
You're talking about Michael Hobbs's highlight piece.
Yes. Right? Okay. This Highline piece in the Huffington Post. Like this was a sort of, to me, a really good look at where this movement comes from and why it is so painful to experience.
It's a heartbreaking story.
It's very good. And he lays it out really well. And he also does a good job of laying out why diet and exercise doesn't work. So this is why the piece is great. However,
it's lots of individual stories. This is like the kind of article, well, you know me, like I could never pull this off.
No, you should never write this piece.
He talks to all these people about their lives.
And they're like really compelling. But he does have the actual evidence, but then he points to real people and you sort of understand other people's experience around that data. And then like the kicker was really good. Kicker being, I don't even know. I mean, that's the last, that's the end of the story. All right. I'm going to read the end of the story. Okay. Because there is no magical cure. There is no time machine. There's only the revolutionary act of being fat and happy in a world that tells you that's impossible. We all have to do our best with the body we have, the source said, and leave everyone else's alone. And what I thought was so compelling about that ending is he walks through this entire piece and he sets up the conflict, the clash between people who know they can't just diet and exercise and lose weight and society that's saying, I'm disgusted by your physical presence. Why don't you just diet and exercise and lose weight? And he even concludes this idea that the anti-fat movement is saying people need to feel good in their own bodies, their own skin, and they have to do the best with what they have, that is what you have. But what is missing from this piece and this conversation is this like we've been talking about. There's actually a solution.
Well, because he says there is no magical cure.
But there is.
And of course, there isn't a quote-unquote magical cure. But there are a range of effective treatments
yes,
that people can access, which I think is something that they should know.
Very few people do. I mean, it's something like, we have a former colleague of ours did a piece at Vox where she was really looking at this, Julia Belluz. And so she had this stat of something like a tiny percentage of people who could benefit from bariatric surgery actually access it in the United States. And there's this disconnect. I mean, there's a total disconnect between the public understanding of the risks involved in these surgeries and the actual risk and the effectiveness and the actual effectiveness.
Well, I suspect that one reason doctors don't recommend this to people is that insurance companies typically won't pay for it. Right. So, there's a...
So that, though, I think there's been some changes that in certain states, Medicaid will now cover it.
Well, that's what I mean, though. Like, as a policy conversation,
right.
Like, part of the question is, like, yes, like, do we want people to get the recommendation that, like, if you're over some threshold,
yes,
the doctor says, like, you should consider this surgery. It can be paid for through some mechanism. If you would like the lower risk endoplasty one, like that option is available, right? And like I think that we should,
right? Look, if you're a doctor and you're talking to a patient who needs treatment for a serious disorder, you don't pretend the costly thing doesn't exist. You don't say I don't know, your insurance looks pretty crappy. I'm not going to mention the chemotherapy.
Right,
You're not
right,
going to say that. You say there's an option, but your insurance might not cover it, et cetera.
Right, but I just think all of society needs
and then
to...
you can have a push around this should be covered, and sort of why aren't insurance covered? There could be lots of op-eds about this of, hey, insurance companies in the long run would be saving a lot of money if more people could get this kind of relatively safe procedure or take one of these drugs that they're not then, they're not dealing with heart attacks and strokes and all of these other, and type 2 diabetes and all of these other outcomes.
But then I think we should also, I guess what I'm saying is that I think we should also pair that with supportive and preventative social change.
Sure. Yes, you can't just then say people can,
This is where I feel like the diet and exercise conversation is in a weird place, right? Which is that there is a constant stream. There's like no information about medical treatments for obesity.
Right.
There is a ton of information about healthy eating.
Yeah.
Like everywhere, like every newspaper all the time.
All the time and stuff,
But there is no policy work on it. And there's also a kind of...
Excuse me, on healthy eating, there's no policy work on...
Well, there's no policy... I shouldn't say there's no policy work on healthy eating.
We're talking about healthy eating. Okay.
There is a shared fake reality that I think like the media and politicians and everybody participates in, where the issue is that everybody deep down wants to eat lots and lots of healthy foods, but it's like somehow not available, or people don't like know that like roasted salmon is better for you than like eating a pack of peanut M&Ms, when I think it's like the vast majority of people are aware that like French fries are not health food. They eat them because they're very tasty and because companies are making money, right?
There are certain things that needed an awareness campaign, right? Like smoking. In the early, it was like, hey...
At a certain point, yes.
Like, and then it's like, we all know that. You don't need to keep telling me about my leafy vegetables being good for me.
Well, but also like, even like the information about smoking was information about how smoking is bad.
Yes.
And then the policy change was to like make it harder to get the cigarettes.
Yes,
make it harder
that's what
to smoke
I'm
the
saying.
cigarette. Right.
But I think we have cleared the bar of, highly processed foods are not as good for you, or actually probably bad as compared to non-processed foods and like vegetables.
And so there's
all
like really low-hanging policy fruit, I think, right? Or some of it's not even policy, but you just like say to corporate America, don't put M&Ms in your office. Like, thank you from the CDC. Maybe like airlines shouldn't just like pass out cookies routinely. Now, obviously, like cookies on airlines is not like a major factor in American public health, but it's part of this, I think, like odd, just kind of like normalization of eating food that like everybody knows is bad for you.
I'm like, don't take those little, the ones that come in the red packets. I love those.
Right, but I mean, it's like you're just supposed to live your life all the time.
Oh yeah, being
like
on high alert,
being
and
like a diet superhero who's thank you.
You have to have willpower.
Please do not give me this free delicious cookie. But like why? Like wouldn't
willpower,
we all be better off if to eat a cookie on an airplane, you had to go to the cookie store and be like, I would like your cookie, sir, because it is so much easier to like resist.
I don't know. I've been to the back of the plane, been like, hey. Can I get a few more of those?
Planes are so boring.
Well, also it's
right?
shameful. I am ashamed right now talking about that, of being in the back of the plane being like, can I have some more of those? Like, that's really embarrassing. But no, people don't do that. I'm not going to go out of my way to get this. Look, there's a lot that needs to be done. And I think it's also, once you've had this weight loss, you got to maintain it. It's not a magical, like you were saying, it's not a magical cure that people who have had these surgeries can gain back weight. They can gain back a certain amount of weight or all of it. There are some, like a lot of the studies that talk about it being successful, they look at a person 1 year later or a few years later.
No, actually, we should be clear about this, because like it genuinely isn't a miracle cure, right? Like what it is that diet and exercise like doesn't work for weight loss.
Right.
But with surgery, it does work.
It maintains.
But you have to eat healthier.
You have to eat healthier after this. And the thing that the surgery does that's so great is it gives people kind of a fresh start where their metabolic system is reset. So they're not, this, hunger hormone is not flooding their system, making it impossible to lose weight. Instead, and you have to make healthy choices. But that's why I think it's
then bad.
Right, to then drop somebody back into the same environment of like, okay, here's some cookies and here's this. It's like, it's
and
not,
just kids. I mean, I think about this all the time with my aforementioned, very healthy 5 at the time, now 7-year-old. But it's like, I would like him to maintain healthy habits throughout his life.
Sure.
And like we try to, raise him well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we've also told him that like smoking is unhealthy.
Sure.
But I'm like really confident. I mean, fairly confident that like he's not going to become a heavy cigarette smoker.
Yeah.
Because the policy environment has shifted so much to like really support not being a smoker. Whereas like everywhere you go, it's like, here, have some processed snacks.
Sure.
And like that's bad. And I think we should try to do. I'm starting with the plain thing. Like Mayor Pete could just tell them like
no more cookies.
Don't give people cookies. Not because it's would make such a big difference, but because it's just like such a an easy step.
I feel like offices should stop too with if you're having a meeting, don't bring a tray of pastries. Why would I do that? Why would there be a cake at this meeting? Why is this here? I mean, just. It's weird.
And there are these normalized things, where it's like, okay, like this is what people do. And now you're not only, do you need the willpower to like resist the cake, which is hard, but you're also being like a little bit rude, which makes it even harder, right? If the polite thing to do is
I don't know about that, but I do think it's just hard to resist. But I mean, we know that willpower is a muscle, and why people tend to fall off the wagon on stuff at the end of the day is like you're tired and your willpower muscle is tired, and suddenly it's like, screw it, I'm having this pint of ice cream, or I'm gonna whatever I'm doing. But throughout the day, if you're being challenged in all these ways, it's really hard. And I think that there are people who have laid out a lot of this stuff of how to create healthier environments, but what we're talking about with obesity is certainly that is a combination of environmental and biological and genetic factors, that certain people are predisposed to having obesity because of just their genetic makeup and their backgrounds. So it's not a simple fix. But we would have to make, the first step is one, we have to say, I think there needs to be a generalized agreement that...
Right. The first step is acknowledging that your friend is wrong.
Yes.
And that's why we do the show.
Yeah.
We do it for you, the people.
Yes, the people. That one, it is not good. Being obese is unhealthy.
Don't be a victim of Laura's friend or of bad takes. So at the end we like to do a review.
Right, review.
I think in this case we have consensus.
I think we do.
Your friend is wrong. Michael Hobbs's piece is a lovely piece of journalism and great writing, and mostly correct.
That said, that last little bit of we have to do the best with the body we have, I say is a bad take, because there are things we can do to help people.
Fantastic. So, this has been a presentation of Grid, another episode of Bad Takes. I want everybody to remember that podcasts can change lives. So you ought to recommend us to your friends. You ought to rate us highly on iTunes and wherever else fine podcasts are sold. And Grid is produced by Olivia Reingold, who in this case made us seem like we knew what we were talking about with medication names. Thank you.